Welcome back. We're here at the Business Roundtable Podcast. I am one of your hosts. We've got four here speakers tonight. And for those that maybe are coming to the podcast for the first time or listening to this episode, my name is David Carr of Steward Your Business. I'm a coach consultant focusing on helping business owners and team leaders lead themselves and their teams, particularly in the architecture, engineering, construction, environmental consulting world. Where we have another colleague, Cara Corsetti. Cara, would you introduce yourself to the audience?
Sure. I am a coach and an industrial psychologist and a management advisory consultant. So I'm really happy to be here. Thank you.
Absolutely. And we have Bil Hatch back again from our last week. So glad to have you, Bill.
Glad to be back. I am, my name, as you said, is on the screen, is Bil Hatch. I promote myself as a leadership guide. I am currently working on my book, or series of books is what it's looking like, because the more I write, the more I write. I'm going to have to find somewhere to cut it off. And I also do my own series of podcasts over on Bald Spots Productions.
Great to have you here. And we have our special mystery guest. For those of you watching video, some of this is audio only if you're listening to the podcast. But for video, we got our special guest back. Doc C, welcome back.
Well, thank you for inviting me back. I have a little sun issue, so that's why I'm kind of here. I am, but kind of hiding behind the shadows. But Curtis Cochran here. We are in the mergers and acquisitions arena. We basically use our E4 math philosophy system to help build companies, increase their value, and of course, someday exit. And of course, that's a challenging dealing with the culture, and of course, what we're going to be talking about tonight. So I look forward to it.
Absolutely. So for those of you that missed episode last week, we were talking about team integration. And one of the things that came up out of that conversation was, how do you do that with an intergenerational workforce? Very different time right now. And so we're going to dig deep into this conversation tonight. And so I'm excited to delve into this not idea, but what we're experiencing right now and understanding this generational divide. And so, Cara, if you don't mind, I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit, but just kind of set the stage for us, if you will, of what are all these different generations that we're facing right now in the workforce, and kind of set the understanding of what does that look like? Yeah.
Yeah, so there's actually, I think there's about 5 generations. Although I will say my parents are, you will often see mature traditionalists for this. Actually, they're older boomers, I guess, but they're still in the workforce. So you might find some traditionalists who might be working, but in general, we have the baby boomers, which is one of the largest generations. And it's about 1945 or so to, I believe, they divided up into 2 sort of cohorts until the mid 60s, early to mid 60s or so. Then we have Gen X. And Gen X starts at about 1965 and goes to the late 70s. We have the millennials, which rival the boomers in terms of size. The millennial generation starts around 1980 or so. And then we have Gen Z now, who I think the oldest members of Gen Z are about 25, 26, 27. And they are now in the workplace. So there's a large amount, many different generations in terms of generational conflict and just what motivates people. I mean, it's all based on stereotypes, of course, right? So we want to stay away from stereotyping. And that's one of the, I think, keys to working with different generations. Mm-hmm. But, you'll have baby boomers who maybe value teamwork, collaboration, more of the traditional promotion structures, recognition, bonuses, stock options, more of that type of environment. You have Gen X, that's a very small generation, about half of the size of the millennials and the boomers. A very independent generation, probably has leaped onto kind of the remote work flexibility bandwagon. Millennials who were raised in a different way than a lot of the baby boomers, right? And so you start to get a generation that they came out of college when there was a recession, right, in the 2000s, and so concerned about job stability, concerned about promotions. I've read that millennials will change jobs every 2 or 3 years, which is vastly different than some of the older generations, like the baby boomers, that value staying in a role for 20, 30, 40 years and sort of getting that gold watch, that stereotype. And so you start to get into, a generation that really values work-life balance. They're looking for wellness. PTO plans become very important, and a much stronger importance on the value of work and what they're doing. And I think you really see that in Gen Z, right? And Gen Z is a very young generation. And a lot of times as a Gen X, you can sort of look back at those movies, right, that we saw in the 80s. And there was kind of a stereotype about Gen X that was, not very sort of the slackers, right? Not very hardworking. And actually, you find that Gen X workers are actually extremely hardworking. And so I guess I point that out, that Gen Z is a very new generation to the workforce. And so we might have stereotypes about them, but, they haven't been in the workforce for that long. And so we might find over the years that some defining characteristics of Gen Z come out and they're not apparent yet.
Yeah, that's a great,
helpful?
Yeah, totally. I think, I think all of us on the call are closer to that end of the spectrum. We've all been in the workforce for some time, and like you said, having that understanding. And so that's something we want to get into, where there are potential conflict or colliding in ways things are done, or like understanding what motivates us. But so just getting the stage, we all have this understanding of these different eras, if you will, generations that are in the workplace, and how they how that's all coming together. So I'm excited to dig in a little bit more in there now that we kind of have a basic understanding of that. Curtis, maybe I'll just come to you next year. And Curtis, you're specializing in your E4 method and helping enhance companies. And so one of the things that you're always helping, we've talked about in previous episodes, how do you make this company saleable? It's not dependent on the owner, building that workforce, bringing the right people into the organization. There's a whole host of things in there, Curtis, but I'd love to just get your perspective on some of the things you're seeing challenges right now.
Well,
in that,
the big challenge is all the different groups that Cara mentioned, and culture's huge. And when you go to buy and sell companies, every company is the culture is different already. Much less now you bring in the 20s, the 30s, the 40s, the 50s, the 60s, and 70s, and even 80s. I mean, people look at things. These kids, I say kids, I'll just say people. People look at things differently. I mean, when you're young, gosh, you can do almost anything, and then when you get older, you look at things differently. And so value changes, and with that, especially when it comes to a merger, after we figure out what the price is going to be, then the next step is the culture and what's going to happen. Because what really happens is you have company A that's buying out company B, and company B, they're all nervous because it's a buyout. And everybody knows it, and they go, so what's going to happen to my job? It might not even exist. You might be gone. I mean, there's a lot of things that happen, and now you throw in the 20s, 30s, 40s, and 50s, and all those age differences. Now it's really chaos. It's really quite interesting to actually be involved in. It's I have no answers. Maybe I'll call Cara when I need her.
I think so. Well, we're going to
help me through that because it really is. It's a working for that watch is a thing of the past a long time ago.
Yeah.
And now what's really out there, it's about what I can get from the company and give to the company before I get traded. And I hate to say it like that, but the buyouts are going to come even faster now, so more than ever.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we're going to do another episode for those listening, because with mergers and acquisitions and all that stuff, both Doxy and Cara have firsthand experience in that, and we're going to have a whole nother episode specifically on that and the integration of that. But to your point, Doxy, and I'll come to you, Bill, next here. But of looking at this in your company, understanding you need a diversity of and we're going to get a little bit more into the diverse workforce later, but like identifying, what motivates, what motivates them, right? Like Curtis, to come and stay, especially if you're getting bought out. Are they going to stay around in the buyout process? Are they going to leave? What's keeping them there? Bill, could you just speak to a little bit about your experience or talking about motivations? And Cara talked a little bit about this, but kind of motivations and the challenges here in this workforce, as you're understanding and learning it, like what motivates these different folks as you're helping lead people, and ethics definitely comes up, right? Ethics and values,
Yeah. Well, each of the generations, the generational groups anyway, do value vastly different things. Like Cara said, the boomers, saw stability as the big thing, whereas the Gen Z, the millennials, are more about finding the best fit. Nowadays, a lot of new workers, a lot of established workers are looking at what does the company provide, not just for me, but for the community at large. Mm-hmm. And they're looking for companies that have that ethical standpoint, where they aren't just about the single bottom line. They're more about that triple bottom line. And where what can we get for our stakeholders? What can we get for our community? What can we get for the world at large? And so that's becoming more and more important, especially more important than, as Doxy said, more important than the gold watch. And because a lot of people, a lot of workers now, especially from the millennials, are looking at having to provide for their own retirement. They're not relying on the companies they work for or the government to provide for them in their old age. Certainly not looking for children to provide for them in their old age. So that's really the first time that we've seen that in a generation, that we're not looking at others to support us. We have to make these plans for ourselves, and so definitely some vastly different ways of thinking between the generations.
And I think, and I'll open this up, just kind of observations you were talking about, some of the challenges I'm seeing in this. And if you're in a leadership role, it's very, it's one thing to be on the other end, but if you're in a leadership role considering this, and one thing I've noted recently here in Southern California, I think this is not just unique to Southern California, but I've seen police departments, public service having difficulty recruiting people, because historically, like you're saying, Curtis, you'd work with a public agency for 25, 30 years, get a pension, right? And you're set. And that people are not, that generations coming in are not looking at that way. So it's very hard as a public agency then to attract and retain individuals that they once used to have that clear, and now they're really struggling. How do we do this? And I've seen some different strategies in compensation and workforce, and we're going to talk a little bit more about strategies for kind of effectively managing or even attracting that workforce. So just, comments or other observations you guys, Cara, I'll just throw it to you first maybe, but just other observations you guys are seeing right now, like real time, that are happening in the workplace.
Let me just jump in here real quick and tell you what I've seen over the years. There are a lot of people that are leaving corporate jobs and leaving these other 30, 40 years to a company and get a watch to become an entrepreneur.
Yeah.
They're tired of the corporate culture. And I don't mean that as a negative, but I do know that there's a lot of people that the ladder was, shall we say, knocked down from them. And so they just made a sideways change and decided to be an entrepreneur. So I think what's happening is, and that's a good thing in my opinion, because now we're bringing in more the brighter minds into the workforce of an entrepreneur, and things are actually changing in that regard. And what's really fascinating is my future son-in-law. He had an excellent job in the aerospace.
Yep.
And he quit to open up his own company. And I guess I shouldn't have nibbled in his ear, told him to do that, but he's really motivated to do that. So he's 20, he's in his 20s, 27, 28. So I think that what used to be the golden rule, so to speak, has changed dramatically. I think that it's changed. Cara, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that for sure. And one thing I think, one thing that comes to mind is really needing to flex, right? And needing to be flexible, because we look at, maybe workers who are the age of your, future son-in-law, or maybe a few years younger, and Gen Z is, diversity. And it's not there. That's such a huge issue in terms of having really solid and progressive diversity and inclusion programs, sustainability. Those types of values are so important and really drive that generation. And then, you have sort of who would be in a traditional corporate structure, who is generally the ones that are in charge, right? And making decisions around things that drive engagement, policies, procedures, compensation packages, bonus payouts, all of those types of structures. Probably people would be in more of the baby boomer, or perhaps traditionalist, or maybe, older Gen X generations. And definitely with baby boomers and older, you have people that very much value that traditional corporate structure, the traditional packages, and there's really a disconnect. And so I see this drive for millennials and younger to really go out and chart their own way. I definitely have heard a lot when I work with staff that there's a perception too that sort of what it's like for them now at their age in terms of being able to buy a house, particularly in urban areas that are very high, very expensive with a lot of inflation. It's a different world. People starting out thinking about potentially having children, doing what someone did 30 or 40 years ago, that's at the tail end of their career. It looks completely different now, right? And so that will motivate people in terms of who they want to work for, why they want to work there, stuff about, like Bill was saying, so I absolutely see that there's a real push away from the traditional corporate structure with a lot of these younger generations.
Yeah, I think that's definitely be a big one. I threw up while you were talking, Curtis, but I'll just say it because people didn't hear. But this is a great book I read a few years ago by Michael Hyatt. Entrepreneurs Will Save the World. But the fact that we need more entrepreneurs, because the reality is, like you were talking about, Bill, is like nobody else is going to come save you. We kind of thought that the government was going to save us. If there was going to be something, I've worked for small companies, I've worked for large companies. There's always volatility. There's going to be some changes in there. So I do see a move in the marketplace. Doc see it. And Carr and I are actually part of that too. We've left corporate America, if you will, quote unquote, but setting up our own shop. And honestly, as we all know, as business owners, the ability to generate wealth in impact, candidly, is exponential on your own as opposed to when you're working as an employee. Not a bad thing about being an employee, no doubt about it. But if you can get there, now that's the challenge. It's a challenge. It's not for everybody. It's kind of crazy, if you will. But I think in that, or I would say, if you can maybe find a place where you can be what I say entrepreneur, where you're in a unique position within a company, but that depends on generation experience. There's a lot of things in there. So yeah, there's a lot of challenges in here, and I mean, we can go into quite a few. I mean, the other one that came to mind as we're talking and sharing here too is like just how things are evolving and moving so quickly. Is just our technologies are changing. The communication has been one for sure that I've seen a challenge with. A lot of the younger generations don't like to pick up the phone and talk on the phone. They'd rather do an electronic form of communication. It's just interesting to see what the preference is and how do we communicate and collaborate. And there is so many ways to collaborate nowadays. I mean, Cara and I just got on, we were messaging, and we just happened to get on a Facebook Messenger call earlier because we wanted to collaborate, which just because it happened to be, we were in that moment of collaboration. We could have been text. But knowing that if you're rigid in certain ways, it's going to be challenging to bridge the gap with these different generations, the rigidness. And I want to, and I'm seeing a little bit about that. The one I see candidly right now is that you mentioned a little bit, Cara, about this whole remote workforce issue. You've got companies swinging both ways. Everybody back to the office 5 days a week. This is the way it needs to be. There's a generation that really values that. Being in the office, being seen, you're doing work. And then you have other generations like, why do I have to be in the office and be seen? Or there's nobody else in the office that I'm collaborating with. So what purpose is that? So these are some real challenges, and maybe we'll get into a few more, but I want to transition a little bit into some solutions, particularly those that are listening to this, whether you're a business owner or a leader. We want to give you some real world answers, hopefully, or suggestions that you can apply to yourself and how you're managing a team. Hopefully you have a management team or a leadership team that's open to exploring some of these strategies for effectively managing these different generations. And so, Bil, if I don't mind, I'll put you on the spot a little bit here, but I think just considering these different generations and some things we should consider. You could just give one or two if you want, but how can we maybe improve the communication or just make it like Carr's talking about inclusivity in our policies or procedures? Just what are some thoughts there from you, Bil?
Well, we've talked about improving communication before, and just how difficult that is to do because you can't improve something that you cannot measure. And so, how many communications can I do better on? Mm-hmm. It would send the grammar check into overdrive just reading that sentence. But obviously what each generation needs to do is learn about how the other generations communicate, especially those that are in their offices, those they have to communicate with. Newer generations tend to prefer electronic. Alexander Graham Bell called and he wants to know why we went back to the telegraph. Text messaging and other forms of messenger like Messenger and and Slack and what all else there is now that I've probably already fallen behind on. Style of communication is also important. The newer generations, the Gen Z especially, likes to talk and likes to communicate in ways that would fry your average grammar checker. They don't necessarily spell words out. They use numbers in place of letters. They use a lot of emojis. And that can be confusing, especially if you'll go all the way back to a boomer having to communicate with them. It's bad enough being a Gen Xer trying to deal with that, but but and vice versa too. Baby boomers prefer face-to-face communication. They talk on the phone and they use complete sentences. So the newer generations have to understand that and have to learn how to communicate with that. And one of the best ways I've learned to accomplish that is to establish mentorship programs. Get the generations together, not like that, pair people up, run classes. Obviously if you have actual classes, you're going to have to figure out how to do it in ways that the people of the different generations are going to pay attention in those classes. Live for the older generations and on demand for the newer generations. But definitely I've found mentorship is a great way to go on getting over that hurdle.
And if you don't have, and this is, I think, too, an important thing as we have this podcast here, is if you don't have somebody in the organization that is really is in a place to be a mentor. I mean, you have to. Oftentimes, I find companies have people that want to be mentored. They just don't have enough mentors, candidly, to pour into them. That's why you can hire a consultant. That's why we're all here.
Yeah.
Reach out to us. How we can be augmenting your look. It doesn't have to be us, but you guys can talk with us. We're here to help answer your questions and see if it's a good fit. Cara and I were just talking about that today, about another potential client that she has, like, hey, how can I help you? What I understand. We're always constantly evaluating and seeing how we can assist them in use modern tools today. That's why I'm just speaking to you, Cara, for you and I, certified giant guides. The reason why we have these, we're with these different, and I'm with Wake Up Warrior too, is we want to curate the tools and the resources to help folks make impact as quickly as possible. But Cara, I know you have so much experience in this area. I'd love to get your thoughts on some of these effective management strategies.
Oh yeah, I think there's so many. I love one thing that I would really say that's an effective management strategy is the mentoring and the pairing up people, and that can be really, really effective. So I really love Bill's suggestion there. I think another thing too that's important is really knowing yourself, right? So all of us as leaders, really knowing ourselves, knowing where our bias is.
Yes.
Because you will all of these ideas about generations are stereotypes, right? And so you might have that 30-year-old that is a technophobe for whatever reason, right? And they just hate technology, and they don't have some of the characteristics of their generation. Just like you might have someone who is in their late 60s, but really loves technology and is an early adapter. And actually is very, very into those types of modalities. So I guess that's one thing too, is making sure to, for all of our teams, really make sure that people are trained on unconscious bias, because intergenerational conflict, that is the area. We might think it's gender, we might think it's different nationalities, religion, but actually the most workplace conflict arises in teams from different generations. So it really is an important thing. I think the other thing I just wanted to touch on too, that as I think about sort of the generational change that's going to be happening here, and all of the baby boomers over time that will be retiring, right? And that might be in leadership roles now. And then you have Gen X that is half the size of the baby boomer generation. A baby boomer is about 80 million people. There's about 40 million Gen X, which means that you're going to have people that need to scale up very quickly, right? And they're not going to have the same type of perhaps career trajectory that people did in previous generations, where they worked their way up over 10, 15, 20 years. They're going to be asked to step up earlier than that, right? And so that's really where mentoring programs, I think leadership development trainings, all of those types of tools to really purposefully make sure that people have the skills to backfill, because I think that's going to be a really great challenge that a lot of leaders and business owners are probably facing, that they just don't, I think, they just don't have the leaders to actually backfill positions. So that is certainly something that we're going to be looking at.
That's a great perspective, Cara, because I know, and Doxy, this is something I know you're working with, because if you're a business owner and you're looking to sell your firm in the next 5-10 years or something, let's just say, if you don't have the team there, how valuable is that company, right? If you don't have the key players and you're trying to sell this company, you're like, right?
Cara said something there that is these baby boomers and the people that lead some of these companies, they're actually quite nervous about what's going to happen because of that gap. And every group, every generation seems to think that they do more than the other, so to speak. But the baby boomers, they have actually taken our economy to new levels, levels that we've never seen before, and now they're kind of nervous and who's going to take it over. And you hit it, David, when you said that that's what I teach, and that's what I actually consult and coach and so forth, and is to who's going to be that next president, CEO. And Carr was spot on. I mean, it's going to be some challenging times ahead of us for sure.
Yeah, I'm seeing it in at least in our industry, Carr and I've come from. I'm literally seeing with some fairly decent sized firms. I've seen them make the change with getting some Gen Xers, if you will, into those leadership positions, late 40s, probably early 50s. Like I said, that typically mean, and they're becoming CEO president of a firm that's been around for 30 plus years, let's just say, which typically maybe would have happened as sooner. But I think that there's a need to move. Like you said, we're literally seeing this right now. Now, a couple of the firms I've seen, they've had people at that firm for 10, 15 plus years. They're very fortunate. They've had somebody stay with the firm that can grow, but not all firms have that, are fortunate to have that. And people then depart for other opportunities. And then you got to bring somebody else in new. And that goes back to what you said, Doxy, earlier too, culture, right? If you're bringing somebody from an outside into this organization, it's not just a generational thing. It's the culture, just the company culture. Again, Cara, we talked about this a bit before, off not on the podcast, but just the challenges of that. It's very difficult. So, as we look at strategies for effective management, I think these are really key times right now to figure out how you're going to navigate this. And depending on your where you're at in your business cycle, or where are you, where are the generations? I mean, it's just a very interesting time. Where are you bringing these people in? Because now you have at least in California, we have with the minimum wage going up and other things, you're trying to attract different generations, if you will, to the workforce, with the food industry and other things. And it's just very interesting to see, again, what motivates them. Because sometimes it's not just money, it's really more lifestyle, it's like, okay, it's still, you try to get them more money and you're like, nah, that's not really what I'm looking for. I'm looking for more flexibility, or like Billy, you're saying, is like what I'm actually contributing to, what's the vision or mission there. So it's not a one size fits all, right? Yeah, the values.
Value.
I've seen that a lot.
I think another thing that is going to become more and more important that it kind of ties into a lot of what we're saying is really having a solid formal career development program where there is a very clearly articulated pathway for people to advance. Because there is also a real sense, a lot of with the younger generations, and I think this is kind of a stereotype, right? Sort of the immediacy aspect, and I think we all have heard anecdotally of that, young employee who's been there for 6 months and wants 2 promotions during that time.
Oh yeah.
And that is a stereotype, but that actually does happen. So in terms of retention and attracting employees, having a very solid career development program where you can actually show a potential employee the pathways that they can take for advancement, I think is very important too.
Yeah.
For companies to consider.
We have,
and I really think you're right, Cara, on the flexibility part of it. It can't just be the stair step. Here's your one pathway up to greatness. There has to be choices. There have to be choices and allowed, even if they're only superficial choices. If I might borrow an idea from the Matrix, but yeah, because it's all about the flexibility. That's why people leave their jobs for new jobs, or leave the corporate situation for the entrepreneurship situation, is because they want control of their own lives.
Mm-hmm.
And, yeah.
I would be curious, honestly, and maybe this is more for Doxy or Cara, because it gets, again, I like the pathway, Cara, and I know every business faces some challenge, like if they want to be sold, but again, an ownership, or how do we do that and structure that? So if there's, if you can keep people in a good way, like offering them some incentive to, be part owner, or shares, or, keeping some, or revenue models, or being very specific about how you're doing that. Again, there's particularly Curtis or Cara on this, because I think you're going to have to come up with some different strategies to keep and retain people.
Yeah, David, you're right, and Bill touched on it, and of course Cara did too, about flexibility. Mm-hmm. And I like that word, because people are getting smarter, and you can't intimidate me by fear anymore. I mean, it used to be back in the day that the baby boomers said, if you don't do X, Y, or Z, I'm going to fire you. Okay, I'm going to do X, Y, Z. We're smarter than that. I mean, we're getting smarter, more intelligent. I'm hoping as a whole that everybody agrees with that. But I like that idea of flexibility, because there's not one direct path. There should be a path for those that maybe didn't go to college, those that do, whatever that might be. You should have that straight, not straight, but that flexibility to get, to climb the corporate ladder. I like that.
Right. I mean, some people, and this is where it throws a wrench in not a bad way. It just, like, some people, like, I would rather have more time off than more pay or getting, bonuses. It's like, how can you work the business to allow for that? So then it's like, you're not getting people special treatment, but it's like, hey, these are the incentives. How can we be flexible, Cara, like you're saying? Because if we were super rigid and we're trying to apply this to all these generations, it's just, this is the way it is. Like you said, Doxy, I think that's going away as people get more aware and they start talking. I mean, go on the internet, start looking. You can find a lot of different things to compare, So the last part I want to just touch on here, as we're, covering, is I want to just focus on, we talked about effective management, but let's talk about how we leverage these different generations as we understand them and help in this diverse workforce. So as we talk about, and we can talk about a specific generation, that'd be great, but but just how do we leverage these things? Because they're all good. There's good and bad on both sides that we talked about, but let's look at, like, focusing on the good aspects, the things that we as business owners or leaders can leverage from these different generations. And maybe, Cara, I'll start with you first, but just kind of like, as you've seen these different generations and experienced them, what would you say? And if you want to pick one, or you can, I'll leave it to you, but what would you say is like, hey, here's something you should consider. Don't just throw this out. Like you mentioned earlier, like Gen X's are really hard workers. So how can we leverage that?
Yeah, no, I think that's it's a great point. So I would say, definitely going in and really looking at the strengths of each of the generations, and with like, let's say baby boomers, the really vast amount of experience, right? The technical expertise, just the years and years of just excellent experience, making sure to leverage that generation in terms of what they know, and also putting them in positions where they're able to effectively mentor and teach other generations so that the knowledge that they have is being passed down to other people. I think in terms of some of the other generations, with Gen X, you have is a pretty flexible workforce in terms of very independent, really kind of able to work in a lot of different ways.
Mhm.
Millennials really looking for, really looking for values, natural connectors, right? Much more comfortable with more communication, right? So more constant communication. So really making sure to plug in millennials as connectors, I guess,
Mhm.
potentially in Gen Z. So there's a lot of different things I think that you can do to really leverage people's strengths, right? So
Mhm.
having a younger generation be a buddy to someone who's in an older generation that's perhaps struggling with technology, but then
Mhm.
having the reverse where that person leverages their expertise and skill set
Yep.
and is mentoring that younger person. So those are just some of the things that I've thought of
Uh,
there.
I appreciate. Yeah, those are some great ideas. As you were saying that, I'm getting the older generation now, but I'm like a techie early adopter. So it's kind of funny, Cara. You can't do stereotypes too, because oftentimes I'm helping the 20 somethings. Like, oh, how do you do that? Where is that again? Because if again, it's this older generation have been using Microsoft Office that's been around for decades. So we know these things, and they're coming into the workforce learning that particular tool or resource. So I think it's important, like you said, don't just stereotype, but recognize that there's uh, where we have interests and our experiences lie. Finding what that is for each individual as well as a generation. Bill, I want to throw it to you here. Just some thoughts on
Sure.
how do we leverage this diverse workforce.
Well, I think Cara kind of hit the nail on all the heads. But yeah, it goes both directions because obviously you do want to leverage the experience, the know-how of the older generations, but there's also the excitement for the new and the digital fluency, if you will, of the younger generations, and that can be very valuable. The excitement to learn new things, the openness to learning the new is definitely something to be leveraged from the younger generations. And mentor teams can go both ways as far as the learning, and really should. If it's not going then both ways, then you've probably mismatched the pair. But yeah. Yeah, there's so many ways to leverage that, because everybody brings something unique to the situation. That flexibility is something that the younger generations have adapted quickly to, and the older generations, I think, need to learn from that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would say, just to tag on to that, one of the great ways I find being able to leverage this is in the industry I work with, or this really could apply to anyone, but if you can find um, uh, workshops, seminars that are industry specific. So I was at the Desert Tortoise Symposium a couple weeks ago. There's different ones where you get interest and bring those generations together and share ideas and create a container and experience. I think that's a way you can definitely leverage it, making it inviting to all generations and creating a space and a safe space that you say, hey, let's hear from these different voices and understand them. Because you're going to get you will create feedback, but you have to be intentional about that. That's what I found. It doesn't generally just happen on its own. It's creating a space and a container for, kind of like you said, Carr, earlier, about a mentorship, or creating some kind of forum or a way that you can get that. Because if I feel like if it doesn't matter what generation it is, but if they feel heard, they feel like they have the opportunity to share, then you have the opportunity actually for growth, innovation, adapting. But if you're not creating that intentionally, then you're missing out on diversifying or getting to leverage the diversified workforce. And in fact, I kind of talked a little bit about this, and as those of you that maybe don't know, I have another podcast, Intelligent Human Leadership, and I just talked about this, about kind of ego and growth, and sometimes how our ego gets in the way, and we know it all, or we just kind of get risk. We don't want to mess with anything, and so for me, anyways, personally, is like when I can get my ego out of the way enough, and like I don't have to know everything, I don't have to have it all together. I can actually leverage this workforce and allow them to speak into my life, speak into where they're at, what's going on. And so as we kind of wrap it up, I just want to give you guys an opportunity, and I'll come back to you, Cara, and then Bill, but just kind of thinking about, as we've all got to work in this intergenerational workforce. For us, we've had probably a couple decades at least, but just to encourage those that are listening, positive action that they can take. Of course, if you guys that they can take in as a leader, leading themselves and leading others, just to take advantage of that and make the most of this dynamic workforce that we're in right now. So, Cara, I'll just throw it to you and then come back to Bill, and we'll wrap up our podcast for the night.
Well, I think, one thing that I think would be really helpful when working with teams, working with intergenerational teams, is really doing some exercises where you create commonality, right? And maybe share personal histories, really recognize that, people have the same experiences, right? Or create opportunities where people learn about each other and form that personal relationship and create trust. And I think that really helps us move beyond biases and move beyond stereotypes that we might have about someone that's in a different generation. So that, I think, is a real easy way, really incorporate those icebreakers, those personal history exercises, working with those teams.
That's great, Cara. And again, that's in something intentional. So if you're not doing that currently, I love that, Cara. It's worth the investment. Like you were saying, over time, it'll pay dividends. And sometimes you go, why do I need to do an icebreaker? Why do I need a little more, right? It will help you. And like you're saying, we're telling you firsthand. And if you're not sure which icebreaker or how to do it, then reach out to Cara or myself, Bill. We'd love to help you. So Bill, what final thoughts here as we're wrapping up?
I'd say in addition to what Cara suggested, I'd say put more effort into learning about the different communication styles of the different generations. Find out how they communicate so that you can communicate with them. And always remember the old saying, if it's going to be, it's up to me. And so if there's going to be communication between generations, it's up to me to make that happen.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, it's all up. Each one of us gets the opportunity to lead, and it starts with ourselves. And I appreciate that, Bill. I'm grateful for each of you sharing. Doxy had to hop off, so we were great to have his conversation in contributions tonight. We'll be coming back with more topics. You heard us talk about acquisitions and mergers and all sorts of things regarding business owners face. So if you enjoyed this podcast, please give us a like, drop a comment in there. We appreciate it. We're on all the podcasting platforms, also on YouTube, and we will look forward to having you back next time. Thank you, Bill, Cara. Until our next podcast, have a great night.
You too.
Thanks so much.
Thanks.